Hello, History 132 students. How are you? Hope everything is going well and everyone is remaining safe uh, and you're progressing through this semester. This is we're up to the next 2 weeks. This semester will be over. You have one final test, test three, and of course your research paper is due before the end of the semester. Tentatively speaking, your final exam, which is test three, will be held the first week of May. So we're talking about 2 weeks. But we have, I think, 3 chapters to cover. And today we're going to be talking about chapter 28, World War and Revolution. In the summer of 1914, the nation of Europe went willingly to war. It's been debated what was the cause of the war, but it occurs, and it goes from 1914 to 1918. The long-term and immediate cause of the conflict is debatable, but we do know that it is clearly a mark in the major break in the course of world history. The map of Europe, Southwest Asia was redrawn. Nationalist movement took roots and spread across Asia. America consolidated its position as a global power, and the world experienced for the first time industrialized total war. Never before has the whole world been at war at the same time. This is revolutionary. We've had conflicts between countries and groups of countries, and we've had civil wars, but nothing like a total war. The war to end all wars, but it didn't end all wars, as we know. For the first time, Europe, great power, started the war and suffered the most in casualties and costs and destruction and in society political upheaval. Imperialism also brought the conflict to the Middle East, Africa, and Asia, making this a global war of unprecedented scope. Scholars began arguing over the Great War origin soon after it began, and debate continued a century after it ended. The war origins lies in the 19th century, and it immediately caused lies in the few years, months before the war, especially one particular morning in June of 1914. This is the date given because on this particular date, an assassination occurs. But let's go back further and let's look at nationalism and try to explain it and its growing appeal. It was one of the major ideologies of the 19th century, and it companion militarism, the glorification of the military as supreme ideal of the state with other interests subordinated any other European concern. So competition between nations, that's the nationalism, intensified greatly when Germany became a unified national state organized by Bismarck. So Germany and Great Britain, commercial rivalry in world markets, and was expressed and created a global conflict. Thus, British leaders set out about shoring up their exposed position with their own alliance and agreement. The British improved relationship with the United States and concluded an alliance with Japan in 1902. German leaders, feeling encircled, formed an alliance with Austria. So we see coming together the Triple Entente, the alliance of Great Britain, France, and Russia in the First War, opposed by the German and the Austrian, the Turkish Ottoman Empire. So the outbreak of war starts on June of 1914 when a Serbian nationalist assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the Austrian-Hungarian throne. His wife, Sophie, was visiting Sarajevo, and this is when he was assassinated. And immediately, Austria declared war on Serbia on July 28th. Germany would follow. They invaded Belgium in August of 1914, and the Great War is now on. So, this war, never before seen, maybe comparable to the American Civil War, where modern weaponry is introduced. You got to think now. The American Revolutionary War, the war was fought with muskets, single-fired muskets, and swords, and cannons, and of course, seafaring vessels. But now, the Civil War, we have revolvers, we have cavalry, we have dirigibles, balloons, we have submarines. But now major weaponry had been developed, and this is further in World War I, where we see the witness of trench warfare, and these were staggering casualty. The German lost 500,000 men the same year that they attacked Verdun. It total lost 700,000 totally, but the slaughter was made even greater by new weapons of war, including chemical warfare, chemical gas, nerve agents, tanks never used before, and now airplanes. Before then, that was only dirigible. Now we have flying machines who can do reconnaissance, drop bombs, fire submachine guns. Then we have flamethrowers, and of course the machine gun. This is the lay of the land, and everybody's fighting. It's trench warfare, and all of this played a role in making this one of the bloodiest, making it the bloodiest conflict up until this point. So by October 1914, the Ottoman Empire joined with Austria and Germany, by then known as the Great Powers, and the war had become global. A crucial turning point in the Spanish conflict came in April 1917, when Woodrow Wilson allowed the United States, which had been neutral from 1914, 15, 16, to stay out of the European War, now declared war on Germany, and he used the attack on the British passenger Lusitania, the sinking of that ship, as a reason. But this boosts the British, the Russian, and the French in their effort to defeat the Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria, and Turkey. And of course, finally, after fighting this deadly war, and I also must mention to you, in the middle of this war, broke out the world's deadly flu, the pandemic of 1918 and 1919. I think it's totally left about 6 to 7 million casualties, but the war was aided in the spread of this flu virus, which had originated in a pig pen up in Kentucky, but with the movement of troops and the mobility, it affected this war greatly on the battlefield. Most of the spread of the virus can be attributed to troop movement, but it also had other social impact. Here in the United States, we see the migration of Southerners to the north, to Detroit, to Pittsburgh, to Cleveland, to Chicago, to New York, to work in the war mobilization effort. Out-migration, this would occur. It would change the population of cities like Detroit, Chicago, Pittsburgh, Cleveland tremendously. This out-migration of particularly black Southerners occurs during this time period. It does not reverse itself until the 1970s when we see blacks migrating back to the South, a century before they had moved to the North for opportunities and jobs. No different than immigration we're seeing today on our southern borders, people trying to make a better way of life. But we see the rise of labor union becoming more powerful. Labor leaders were participating in policymaking council. But we also see women become more visible, not only as munition workers, but also as bank tellers, mail carriers, and even police officers. And during this time period also, women's petitioning the government for women's suffrage. Susan B. Anthony, and of course, immediately after the war, the 19th Amendment, I believe it's the 19th Amendment, which gives women the right to vote, is ratified. So this effort during the war facilitated the further demand for women's right of the ballot. War also promoted social equality, blurring class distinction, and lessening the gap between rich and poor. Greater equality was reflected in full employment, rationing according to physical need, and a sharing of hardships. Society became more uniform and more egalitarian. In the United States, we see the Roaring Twenties because of the passage of the Prohibition Act, bootleg, making of moonshine and homebrew, the rise of the American Mafia. All of this is taking place. The Roaring Twenties, money is flowing. Women's are raising their skirts and dresses. They're doing the Charleston and the Scotch and other dances. We also see the rise of the Harlem Renaissance, W.B. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston, James Weldon Johnson. All of these names of art is appearing between the wars. And in Russia, we see a revolution occur, mainly because of the Great War. It led to what we call the fall of the Imperial Russia, the Tsar. And they were replaced by Bolshevik, led by Lenin, Vladimir Lenin. They came to power in 1917 and promptly established a dictatorship to win the civil war that's going on. But Lenin then moved to make peace with Germany at any price, and thus ended World War I with the Germans and Russia. But communists now had a toehold in Europe and Asia. Russia would become a communist nation up until the 1980s. Other global conflict consequences would be labor intensity. The Allies soon worked out peace terms with Germany and created a peacekeeping force called the League of Nations and reorganized Eastern Europe and Southwest Asia. The 1919 peace settlement failed to establish a lasting peace or resolve the issue that had brought the world to a war. World War I and the treaties that ended it shaped the course of the 20th century, and in 20 years later, the world will be back at war, World War II. We're going to talk about that next week. But at 11 o'clock on November 11, 1918, World War I officially came to an end. And it was done at the Paris Peace Treaty, but the League of Nations failed because Woodrow Wilson plan for it was not agreed to by the U.S. Congress. The Congress did not want to get involved in conflict in Europe. The Treaty of Versailles and other agreements reached in Paris were seen as the first step towards reestablishing international order. But that would not last because mainly the American rejected the treaty, and of course the German did not agree to pay the reparation that the treaty calls for. And this would lead to World War II. But there were hopes in foreign affairs, hope in democratic government, and an end to monopoly, the rule by one. Mostly republics were established, but colonization continued in Asia and in Africa, and there's an age of anxiety went along with this. We see uncertainty in philosophy and religion. I need to point out to you German Friedrich Nietzsche, who questioned whether there was a God. Uh, New physics developed during this time period. J.J. Thomson discovered the subatomic particle in 1897. Uh, Marie Curie and her husband Pierre discovered radium and demonstrated it constantly emitting of subatomic particles and thus does not have a constant atomic weight. But the key physics at this time was a man named a German Jew by the name of Albert Einstein. He further undermined Newtonian physics. His theory of special relativity postulated that time and space are relative to the observer viewpoint, that only the speed of light is constant for all frame of reference in the universe. Einstein's theory on matter and energy are interchangeable that even a particle of matter contains enormous levels of potential energy, and this would later become the scientific basis for the atomic bomb, which will be used to end World War II. Other physicists of this time is Ernest Rutherford, he who first split the atom. We also see a rise in Freudian psychology. Sigmund Freud speculation were particularly disturbing. Before Freud, psychology assumed that human behavior resulted from rational thinking by the conscious mind. By analyzing dream and hysteria, Freud developed a very different view of the human psyche. Freud concluded that human behavior was governed by three parts of the self: the id, the ego, and the superego. The primitive, irrational unconscious, which he called the id, was driven by sexual, aggressive, and pleasure-seeking desires and was locked in constant battle with the mind's two other parts. The rationalized unconscious, the ego, which mediates what a person can do and ingrain moral values. The superego, which specifies what a person should do. Thus, for Freud, human behavior was the product of fragile compromise between instinctive drives and the control of rational thinking and moral values. So, don't forget Sigmund Freud. He'll be on your test. So, also in 20th century literature, we see James Joyce, the Irish novels, his Ulysses. Other writers of this time that stand out is T.S. Eliot and his Wasteland. But we see major changes in architect, art, and music. The United States pioneered in a new architect in 1990, the Chicago School of Architect, led by Louis H. Sullivan. Skyscrapers developed. Other development would be in paintings by artists, which was more provocative, emotion disturbing, and harshly satire. We also see the development of modern music, which strike parallel to those in painting. Jazz rose up from the Plessy versus Ferguson when classical blacks were forced to interact with the field hands. The ship stevedores produced what we call jazz, Louis Armstrong style. So, the emotional intensity of expressionism composers depict unseen inner world of emotion and imagination. Down comes movies and radios. In the decade following the First War, motion picture became the main entertainment of the masses worldwide. The silent film industry, and led by Charlie Chaplin, demonstrated that a hand of a genius, the new medium could combine mass entertainment and artistic accomplishment. So, the movie theater, but the radio became dominant after the war. In the 1920s, the first major public broadcast was made in Great Britain and the United States. Every major country quickly established a national broadcasting network. This is the origin of soap operas and, of course, the use of the radio to spread propaganda and religious beliefs. So a lot is changing, but things will really change in the 30s when the Great Depression will come. And that's what our next lecture would be on the Great Depression and World War II. And our final lesson would be on the Cold War and the last 40 years. So work on your research paper. Go ahead and knock that out. If you have a problem, let me know. I'll be glad to help. This ends this lecture on chapter 28, and next week we would do chapter 30 and 31. If you are having problems now, let me know. Please use your study guide to prepare for this upcoming test. Okay? Be blessed. Kaver out.